my fingers on the vinyl. I let it go, stopped it. But the taboo thing was you're not supposed to touch the middle of the vinyl.
This is the birthplace where it all began.
Watch me now. Feel the groove.
How the crowds respond when you drop a lot?
Crazy, man. Stop it, man.
They had this incredible sound system.
You never seen nothing like it. It's the next generation ushering in a new idea.
Hold up. You're taking this rock rap thing too far.
Something had to be able to give upward motion and strength and pride. You got words, you got a voice, use it.
6 in the morning, police at my door.
I can't just live the game, I got to document the game.
You know what make me feel real good today? Putting you in jail.
Everybody was like, you ready to grapple with these sheriffs and LAPD around here? You ready to do that? And I'm like, man, we gotta do something.
I just remember the FBI going, you can't rap this. Yeah, we can. Like, we gonna stop us?
DJs, the best you heard. Zulu Nation, MC, and Hustlers, Drago, Generation, Gangs,
Music,
Pioneer,
Record, hip-hop,
and the rest is history.
With us, we have a fantastic guest out here, Rodrigo Bascuñán, executive producer at Scenario. Rodrigo is an award-winning writer, producer, and director with rather serendipitous path. Now, in 1998, he founded Canada's largest hip-hop magazine, Pound, which he ran for over 10 years. He co-authored Enter the Babylon System, a look at gun violence through the eyes of the hip-hop generation. And before launching Scenario, he wrote and produced Netflix's docuseries, Hip Hop Evolution, which has gone on for more than 4 seasons by now. Hip Hop Evolution has gone on to win a Peabody Award and an International Emmy. And I invite you, Rodrigo, to join us out here.
Hi, Prakash. Rodrigo, how are you?
I'm doing good. How you been doing?
I'm great. Yeah, excited.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo. I know you had a busy time. I know you guys are in between shoot is what I understand. And you made the time for us to talk about it. And I remember one of the questions was, what are we going to do in a behavioral science fest? I mean, why do you guys need us out there? And yes. I said, we'll find out because we are all about taking diverse fields, you pick them up together and you make a nice blend because it is easy in books to say this is geography, this is history, and and this is physics and chemistry. But out there in the world, everything is mixed and everything is just out there together. And earlier in the day, we had fantastic professors, Krishna Bichir and all, talk about social norms, psychological theories, and how they bring about change in people. And we thought it'll be fantastic to have Rodrigo come over here and talk about how music can help create those changes, how it helps create subcultures. Rodrigo, as we start, we would like to hear a little about your own upbringings, your own roots. Tell us something about yourself.
Okay, I was born in Santiago, Chile, actually, in 77. My parents, I was born in 76. Should get that right. And my parents immigrated to Canada in 1977 when I was a year old. So I grew up in Toronto, I've spent nearly all my life here except for that 1 year when I was a baby. So I grew up in the city, pretty centrally in the city, in the downtown core. And, at an early age, when I was about 5, 6, 7, and in those years, I started to see, those were my first experiences with hip hop, where I started to see the older kids in my neighborhood breakdancing. I saw graffiti, and of course I would hear the music as well. And I started to become curious about this individually because I was still too young. I didn't really understand that these things belong together. So I liked breakdancing independently, and I liked graffiti independently. And then as I got older, by the time I was about 10 or 11, I started to put this whole thing together. Oh, this is all one culture. Like, oh, that seems incredible. I need to be involved in this somehow. So at that age, I started listening to the music more, understanding it from a cultural and political perspective. And for me, it just was very in line with my experience as, political exile, as an immigrant, as a kid growing up in a big city. All those things, were spoken about through the music. So I felt very connected to it. And, so from there, it was just, growing and growing within the world. At the beginning, before, and this is something that has been lost a little bit in hip hop, is that in the early years, to really be a part of the community, you had to participate. You had to have a skill. So, if you really want to say, I'm part of, I'm a part of the hip hop community, you had to learn something. You had to bring something. So, the first thing you would do is figure out, well, what can I do? And for me, DJing seemed like my skills were most appropriate for a DJ, in that, I liked records. I liked playing with records. I liked music. I had a good ear. So I thought, I don't think I could be a break dancer. I think that is too physically demanding for me. I definitely can't rap, because I don't think I have a good voice. And, so for me, it left, and I didn't think I was good enough to do graffiti. I didn't think I had that talent. None of which might actually be true. I might have been able to do any of them, but at that time I thought, well, I think I can DJ. So from about 14, 15, I started teaching myself and practicing and buying records. And then, over the years, getting more and more records and starting to play parties and, getting involved, eventually having a radio show. And, that back then was a very typical course of action for people in hip hop, was to, well, I want to be part of this. What can I do? And I want to bring something to the culture. I want to advance it. I want to show that I have talent, that I can bring some new ideas into it. And that was very much the push. I think now there's much more of a consumer participation in the culture rather than a participation. So those are my early years. We could go on, but once I get into my early 20s, it starts to become more of my career and my life in a way that I hadn't anticipated. But that's a start.
You said something very interesting out there with the whole participatory nature versus the whole consumer nature out there. It reminds me a bit about one of those numbers from KRS-One, where he's, I think, giving you the elements of hip hop. It goes about breakdancing, b-boying, MCing, graffiti, and beatboxing. But it was very interesting. He says somewhere, he says street language, the verbal communication, or their codes around the nation. And it was imperative to be involved, like you say, right? You have to either DJ or, you have to learn your breakdance. You got to rap. One of the elements you need to pick up. And I think the easiest one for many people, possibly, I'm just speculating, was the street codes. And you talk about the participatory nature. Do you think there has been an evolution? And you just touched some time on that. But can you elaborate on that? The hip hop, let's say in the 70s or early 80s, versus the whole, if you may, the very commercial nature of hip hop right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a big question, and I could answer it from many angles, but you could get very philosophical about this, in that when we interview all the pioneers and you try to get at sort of the essence of the culture, it sometimes gets a little bit cloudy, a little bit nebulous. You're like, well, what exactly is this thing that we do together? What is it that we understand collectively? And for some people, I remember DJ Red Alert, who is an incredibly important DJ, was part of Zulu Nation, was one of the first DJs in New York with a radio show. He is a mentor to Tribe Called Quest and De La Soul and Jungle Brothers, and a crucial figure in hip hop. Red Alert was like, it was really about how you carried yourself in a lot of ways. And that's, you know, very interesting, because that is that's very like, that is very loose. How do you define something like that? I think personally, I think the most concrete way that you can define hip hop in the early years is this appreciation and celebration of break beats. That is the foundation. That's really the thing at the beginning. So, you know, if we take it back to the very beginnings, you have some DJs, starting with DJ Kool Herc, who's from the Bronx, of Jamaican origin, who starts playing just these little snippets of the records. You know, the best part of it was the breakdown part of it. So, you know, if you listen to old funk and soul and jazz records, there would be points where, you know, a lot of the music would drop out, and it would just be the drummer and maybe another percussive element. So it's just the beat at this point. And he would take those parts and he would play them back and forth together. So he's looping it. He's creating a loop with his turntables of these drum sections. These are the breaks. And this is why we call them break dancers, right? So, and then they become B-boys, break boys. So that is, from a musical perspective, the most foundational aspect of the culture that still carries forth today, that united everyone back then. Then growing outward from there, so you have this musical component, the breaks, that everyone gathers around. So the DJs have to be able to play breaks to entertain their crowd. Their crowd are dancers who want to dance to these breaks. To be able to DJ breaks requires quite a bit of skill and dexterity. It's not like if you're a disco DJ, you play one record for 5 minutes, you play another record for 5 minutes. It's a lot more of a smoother tempo. It's not as demanding. To be a hip hop DJ who played breaks, you have to be able to, you know, transfer between records very quickly and keep a flow going. That was much more difficult. So what it did is that the DJs had to develop a whole style that adapted to this. So this is why we end up with such advanced techniques in hip hop DJ culture versus other DJ cultures. This is why scratching comes out of hip hop and doubling records up comes out of hip hop. It's out of a necessity to keep up with the tempo of breaks. So now we have we have two elements already. Then the third element is an extension of this. So, you know, to keep the crowd going, to participate, create more crowd participation, more dancer participation, the DJ would speak on the mic. They would give people shout outs. You know, I see so-and-so out there. Oh, I like what you're doing. So-and-so's looking nice tonight, blah, 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 blah. This now starts becoming in its own thing more competitive and evolves from, you know, light chatter to, you know, simple rhymes to all of a sudden, you know, it becomes, again, advanced in its own right, in that there are people who specialize in this. And then we start calling these people MCs, right? The masters of ceremony. So now you have three elements. You have your B-boys, your DJs, and your rappers. So you've got the three pieces there. Graffiti's story is more complex in that it predates hip hop as a culture. And it's sort of like, it fits into the Venn diagram, but it really has its own life as well. It has its own history. There is a heavy overlap in 1970s and 80s New York between hip hop culture and graffiti culture, but they are not entirely synonymous at the same time. You know, you can't say that hip hop birthed graffiti. It's not true, but it is intertwined with it, but it also can exist separate from it. Then later on, you know, in the 80s, in the late 70s and early 80s, you have the Zulu Nation, which is another group from the Bronx, from an area called Bronx River. The leader of that organization is Africa Bambaataa, who is also a DJ who has the same style as Herc, but a much more expansive collection, tens of thousands of records. There's records that Bambaataa played back then that people still aren't sure what they are 40 years later, because it was very secretive. You know, your records mattered. You know, if you had a special record that got everybody excited and dancing, that was part of your package. That was part of the entertainment you were delivering that day. You didn't want to let anybody else have that record. So the DJs back then, they didn't share that information. So Bambaataa had a bigger picture than, you know, the other foundational DJs. He was the one who started to think about it as a whole culture. And what that created is what, you know, most people will refer to as the fifth element, which is knowledge. So understanding your history, understanding the history of the music that composes rap, the history of the people that participate in the culture, the politics of this world, all of that, and was instrumental in forming like a more cohesive perspective and philosophy for the culture. From then on, you start to get even more offshoots. You know, some people will say, you know, like you were mentioning, language or fashion or beatboxing, entrepreneurialism, because I think there's a distinct set of hip hop has a very strong do-it-yourself ethos that comes out of its core philosophies of, you know, we are underrepresented people with a lack of resources. If we need to take what we have to create our futures, so that applies in an entrepreneurial space. It's part of the same hunger that drives a rapper or a DJ to want to advance and be the best, is the same hunger that propels the entrepreneurs that come out of the culture. It's the same energy behind it all. So I think hip hop is different in that other music forms don't have such expansive cultures, and they don't have a built-in entrepreneurial element. So from the very beginning, the exercise and the desire for material gain to see a financial reward for your efforts was not seen as being entirely contrary to the art form. So whereas many arts, there's this idea of selling out, and that certainly existed in hip hop and was a major conversation in the culture. It was okay to make money at the same time. That was understood. Do you want to say something, Prakash? Sorry, I was going on.
Let me butt in here because I want to take the train of thought that we just said, and I want you to bring in elements of punk, because we're talking 70s, we're talking 80s. So on this side we have hip hop, which is coming up. It's all the street, and on the other side the punk music scene with Ramones and Sex Pistols and all of this also getting quite big. And one of them has gone to take over the entire world today. There's no corner on this earth where hip hop has not reached. On the other hand, the punk culture, while pretty alive, has not had the same successes. And I want you to help us understand, is it because of this whole entrepreneurial nature that hip hop espouses, that kind of evangelizes? What do you think is happening out here?
I actually, I think hip hop's advantage over all the other genres is built into that most foundational aspect, the break. Because the break allows you to pull from any type of music. You can pull breaks that sound disco-y, you can pull things that sound funky, soulful, rock-like. All of that is okay. The genre isn't defined in the same way as other genres are defined. Punk has a sound. You couldn't really make classical sounding punk or something that was overly funky. It would start to turn into something else. Punk has to sort of stay in a zone of a musical style. Rap music does not have that boundary, in that you can if you look at rap music and you break down all the eras, there's radical changes. Rap music today doesn't sound anything like what it did like 10 years ago, and 10 years ago didn't sound like what it did 20 years ago, and so on and so on. So I think that is a very part of hip hop's ability that's built into its DNA of always, you know, refreshing itself, makes it stronger as a genre.
Oh, thank you with that. Yep, you're right. It'll be hard pressed to find a punk rocker who's talking about the millions that he's making right now, because that just goes against the ethos. Thank you with that. And we will touch the whole entrepreneurial nature. Primarily, I think maybe Jay-Z is one of the best examples out there, from the streets to being even Puff Daddy out there. We'll go over there. But let's stay right now in the 80s. We're talking The Message, Grandmaster Flash, and the Famous Five. And we're talking entire 80s, Right Tail, NWA, Rodney King. There is a good amount of, I want to touch two things out there, I think. Number one is the whole representation and protest, the nature of protest out there, or owning the N-word, for example. Number one is this. Number two is US is a bastion of free speech. But I think one of the first times when you had this whole idea of censorship come up, if I'm not mistaken, was with Two Live Crew. And Banned in the USA was one of their songs in response to that. So help us understand the journey in the 80s. How is hip hop helping people give them a voice, right from, you know better than us.
Right. I mean, again, some of these things were intentional and some of them were, it just happened organically. So of course, the rapper is a built-in element of the culture. But at the beginning, it's not clear that the rapper is the forefront of the culture. At the beginning, the DJ is the leader. That's why all these early groups have the DJ's name first. It's Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. So at the beginning, the DJ is really the face. And for a little while, the breakdancers, the B-boys become the face, because B-boying, because of its very visual element, it was so easy to understand. If you see people who are B-boying, you don't need to explain that to anyone. They don't need context. Someone sees someone spinning around and doing flips. It's like, that's just incredible on a basic nature, that element that any human can understand that. So because of that, the B-boying stuff took off very quickly in the early 80s. And for a while, that was the forefront. But eventually, the rappers did become the face of hip hop culture. And I think there's a few reasons for that. There's an easy commodity to include with rapping. What do you sell for a DJ? That's not as clear. Their most vital expression of what they do is meant in a live forum. So, or you can be a radio DJ. That also works. But it's not necessarily a commercial product. The B-boys, same thing. It was great for events. You could sell, I guess, back then there were B-boy crews that had records that, and posters and sort of VHS, like learn how to break dance videos. But it wasn't easily commodified either. But rap music already could tap into the existing infrastructure of the music industry. That was a very easy transition. Although it seems like I think it's important to point out that although that transition seems so easy and so obvious to us now, it wasn't obvious to people at the beginning. It wasn't obvious to the earliest rappers and the earliest participant in hip hop that making a record actually made sense, right? At the beginning, I remember someone explained it that the first time that the rappers were approached to make records, it was like asking a basketball player to make a record. They didn't understand, like, of what value is my performance to you in this other forum? It was foreign. It didn't make, it wasn't logical to them. To them, what they did was this dance between the DJ and the rapper. That was the thing, so taking it to vinyl or into a recorded form wasn't obvious. They considered what they did to be a performance art, not a recorded art. Anyway, after this so there are many people who sort of are looking for rappers. The first big success, it's not the first rap record, but the first big success is the Sugar Hill Gang, which comes from a label called Sugar Hill Records, which was owned by a woman named Sylvia Robinson, who was a record label veteran, record industry veteran, and she was a singer herself. She signs a trio from New Jersey who are not part of this original sort of hip hop community. They're outsiders, but they make a record. It's incredibly successful. No one really knows how many copies it sold. I've heard up to 17 million, definitely deep in the millions. I'd say minimum 8 million, probably much more than that. And it's a massive success. And people start to say, oh, wow, there is money in here. There is money to be made. So what happens is that many of the very first expressions of rap music in the recorded form are quite exploitative in that they're just meant to be quick cash grabs. You know, oh, here's a new fad. Look at this. It's people rapping on a record. They just have to talk. We'll put it over some, popular music and it's done. Or, we'll sell 500,000 of these by accident. So that's what happened at the beginning. Many of the original records did not necessarily represent the true spirit of the culture. Then what happens is that some people start to say, well, what do we do if we have this big platform now? If people are giving us this opportunity to send a message out to hundreds of thousands of people globally, it could go anywhere once we've put it on a recorded format. Perhaps we should use this platform for something else. Because although hip hop is political in nature by just the expression of new voices, it wasn't explicitly political at the beginning in its lyrical content. There were some rhymes that had, mentions of the politics of the United States and of New York, but it wasn't like every rap record early on was a political treaty on anything. So this changes. There are a few records that predate this as well, but The Message, which is the record that's done by Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, and actually conceived by someone that isn't part of the group, named Duke Booty, who was a teacher. He was the actual one who conceived of the record. It becomes the first major message record. And of course, it's called The Message. So this, again, it is incredibly successful, but it is a very different take on rap. And it is not primarily a dance-oriented record. It's a slower tempo record. It's got like a heavier feel to it. The rhymes, of course, themselves are talking about, something in a very blunt way about the reality of life in New York City in the early 80s. And it's, quite bleak. But what it does is it actually presents an entirely new story to most people who aren't living in these conditions. So all of a sudden, record critics and other people who are in the music community start to recognize the potential of this rap style to create, music that or messages that go just beyond a party. And that's when we have the formation of this political voice. I'll stop there for now.
We are loving it. Please keep on going. And we have another panel lined up in some time, but I think we're gonna overshoot our time out here for sure, and they will not mind because Pedro, Iman, Jez, Flavia, Channing, I'm sure you guys are enjoying this as much as we are, and we will be all starting our session in some time. But for now, let's kind of continue with understanding how hip-hop subcultures have emerged. We have heard a lot from social scientists, professional PhDs about the whole art of bringing change. And let's talk about hip-hop. Let's talk about misogyny, right? Number one, on one side, you got misogyny, and there's a lot of criticism towards rap music for the lyrics, number one, on one side. On the other hand, you have a lot of news right now, a criticism thrown towards Cardi B for the new song WAP. And it's like, okay, it's obscene. Is it bad? What is the line? And if you go back to almost 30, 40 years, you still have Salt and Pepper saying, push it, right? Sing it out. Help us understand what is this whole deal with rap and misogyny? Is it empowering women? Is it changing their expectations of how to deal with their own sexuality? Or is it making them more objectified? How do you interpret this?
Right. I think it's something that you have to take on a record by record basis and on an artist by artist basis, What is their background? What is their intention artistically? You know, who is benefiting from it? So I think much of the misogyny in rap music, I think, falls under the blanket of exploitation, in that there are people who benefit from these records. So, you know, the collision between hip hop culture and the record industry is not a smooth one. You know, a culture is a culture. An industry has completely different goals. Ultimately, the goal of the record industry is to make money. And so what they found early were some formulas. Of course, in American culture has a history of teenage rebellion that goes back to the 50s. So the record industry is aware of all of this. They are aware of the sort of the norms and the stereotypes that have worked successfully in the past. So at the beginning, it's like rap in the 80s is just creating permutations. This thing is loud. This one is quiet. This one is sexy. This one is, you know, political. This one, it's all kinds of things are being spit out. There's all kinds of styles that are emerging in the 80s. It's just creating permutations because no one knows what to do with it, how to control it, any of that. But when you get to a certain point, there becomes an understanding of, oh, this stuff that is hardcore, the stuff that is extremely rebellious, you know, that is very successful because, you know, again, you have a collision between culture and commerce in that the people that are buying the records do not necessarily reflect the interests of the people in the hip hop community. Yet you, on some level, will be affected by this, but it's not really a closed feedback. So the buying populace in the United States and in North America is primarily white because the population is primarily white. You know, at the time, we're probably talking that United States in the 80s, early 90s is in the 70 to 75% white. So they are the bulk of the consumers. Their interest in rap music is strictly not, and this isn't for everyone because there have always been white participants in hip hop culture, but the majority of the consumers, their interest in the culture is strictly sort of a voyeuristic one. It's fun. It's a voyeurism. Oh my God, listen to the things that they talk about. It's a peek into a world that is so different from theirs. And it's very appealing to them. It has all these elements. Oh, they talk about life in the inner cities and gangster stuff. And it's so raw. And all of this is appealing in the same way that violent movies are appealing, in the same way that horror films are appealing. It's a product that has been made that works for them. The misogyny is a part of this spectrum in that North American culture is misogynist. So these are not the values of hip hop culture. These are the values of North America. North America is misogynist. North America is okay with violence against women. North American culture and society is okay with the promotion of abuse towards women. That is fundamentally the issue. And so then you have this collision of these values and this culture creating product that is beneficial to certain parties. And that's where you have this proliferation of misogyny over time. You know, internally, hip hop as a culture was very, very against the misogyny that existed in rap music as a business. Those were different.
Yeah. Jump in here because you said initially it was very much against misogyny. I remember Queen Latifah's number, UNITY. What I want to come down here to is, let's talk about bringing social change. You talk about the North American culture being a certain way. Number one, let's say, you know, alternative or sexual minority, right? The LGBTQ, number one out there. All right, let's talk about that. Is it possible to bring about change in society through giving a right representation to say LGBTQ singers more in the hip hop world? Right now we have got, I think, Lil Nas X, we got Monet,
Young M.A.
Yeah, and so they are open about their sexuality. Do you think more hip hop artists owning up about their alternate lifestyles or their sexualities is going to make it more easy from a social norms point of view to kind of acknowledge and become okay with it, because rap has seen rampant homophobia all throughout.
Mm-hmm.
How do you interpret that?
I think there's a tendency to overstate what hip hop can do and its influence on society. I think hip hop is more of like a signal in the big picture. Ultimately, I think the signals that a child or anyone growing up or anyone developing their moral and ethical center gets from their education, from their parents, from the government and political leaders is much more impactful. I think that if America had a president right now who wasn't racist and misogynist and transphobic, that would be much more effective than rap records being, openly pro LGBTQ. I think the fact that rap has moved in that direction is certainly positive, and I'm very happy about that growth and that progression, because it has long been a hurdle for the culture, but I think it happened. And there are of course voices within it that protest, but overall most people are quite accepting. Come as you are is okay, and I think that openness of rap music and hip hop culture has always existed. So it was sort of a matter of time. But again, I think culture changes first as a whole. North American culture, Western society changes first. Hip hop might be on the forefront of that edge of progressive thought because of the participants and their backgrounds, but it's still part of that. It's not separate. It's not advanced in that sense. So I think that, hip hop can affect change to a certain degree, but it's more of a signal to me. They're important signals in that the culture has a very large platform globally now, and that there is a leadership role in that. But I think it's secondary to the bigger signals that we get from the major institutions that have always shaped us as people, whether that's politics or religion or the mass media as a whole.
Thank you for that. I like the way you tied it down, saying hip hop is more the torchlight, showing what's happening with society. Kind of resonates with Ice Cube saying gangster rap made me do it. His song saying it tends to get a disproportionate amount of blame, and possibly yes, it can bring about change, but it's not bringing about change because of the power of hip hop. It's more a signal, as you said. Right. And with that fantastic point of view, I think we would like to thank you. But before you go, Rodrigo, yes. Is there something else that you want to talk about? Because you get the zone that we are in within our fest out here. We've talked about economics. We've talked a little bit of politics, some entrepreneurship. We talked behavioral changes and products. And then we talked about martial arts sometime back in the day. Right. And any closing remarks from your side, Rodrigo?
No, not in particular. No, I'm certainly as a comment, I'm very curious of the growth of hip hop in India in the last few years. That I would love to learn more about and just see how the culture is interpreted in a new space is always fascinating. I think globally, again, because of these sort of foundational elements of how hip hop is built, and that it's more of an approach than a sort of determined form, that it allows for a lot of interpretation wherever it moves. And that's what we've seen, that pattern over and over. So it goes to France and it becomes slightly different, goes to England and becomes slightly different, South America, and so to see that in a new space I think is beautiful. I'm just curious to see that evolve, and I hope people. I think if I did have a comment, and this ties into what I'm saying, I hope that wherever hip hop appears, that it's understood first as a culture, then as, you know, a commodity. I think now more than ever, we have more rap fans than there ever have been. Lots of people are rap fans. Hip hop participants, hip hop community is not bigger. It is not necessarily growing at the same rate. That I would like to see change. That so if you get involved in hip hop, to get involved deeply, to consume it is not participation. It's simply consumption. You know, I think that is something I'd like to, if there are people that are listening to this and they love rap music, it would be I'd ask them to have a deeper understanding of what they're listening to.
What lovely thoughts. Don't just consume, go out and create too.
Right, exactly.
Ties back to the ethos of hip hop. Rodrigo, I realized earlier I said Grandmaster Flash and the Famous Five blame that on my lack of coffee. At this rate, I'm going to call the Ghetto Boys, the Hardy Boys. Yes. You know, I'm almost there. But, well, a coffee will fix it up. Yes. Rodrigo, muchas gracias. I don't even know how I thank you on behalf of all the people. You know, a lot of people are curious how hip-hop ties down to Northwest and behavior sciences and social changes. Right. And our team was like, of course it does. Wait till Rodrigo appears out here on stage. And you gave us a fantastic, power-packed, compressed journey. Yes. And we all loved the show that you and your team has put down. And congratulations on that Emmy, on that Peabody. And we all hope we got much more awards to come down your way. Keep up the good work and stay safe. Stay safe.
Thank you, Prakash. Take care of yourself. Have a great conference. Take care.
All right. Bye.